officially welcoming you. Welcome to Lunchtime Yin. So Yin is usually a really slow yoga practice. We kind of focus mostly on a kind of sensation of stretch and letting go into that sensation. You don't want to be aggressive in this way because we're going to touch into some tissues that are a little more resistant, like the fascia that wraps around our muscle, and the tendon and the bone and the joints themselves. And so always make sure that you are just barely at the place where you feel something. You don't want to be all the way to the place where it feels very, very spicy. You want to be just right on that, like, oh yeah, I feel that spot. If it's too spicy, then we can use some props to kind of help. So I've got a blanket, I've got a couple of yoga bolsters, but you may not have that at your house. So some throw pillows work really great in the place of yoga bolsters. And if you've got blocks or other kinds of yoga props, you can certainly gather all the things around you. Mostly some pillows and blankets make really great props for this. So we're going to start actually laying on our back with something underneath us to create a little bit of a lift. So I'm going to use this bolster. You might want to use a throw pillow or even two. If you want one so that your head is a little bit higher, you can put one throw pillow up on top of the other so that there's a little bit of height. And then I'm going to put this blanket underneath my legs because we're going to do kind of a butterfly shape with the legs. So I'm going to put this underneath so I can kind of control how intense the stretch is. So I'll put that under my legs, and then I'm going to lean back over this bolster. And I want it to land about so that the bottom of my rib cage is right about at the bottom of the bolster. So I'm supporting all of this bone structure that helps hold me, but I'm not being too pushy with my lower back curve. Now some people like the bolster to come all the way down to the sacrum, and you will have to do a little experiment and see if that's true for you. And then I usually pull the blanket up quite tight up against the edge of my hips so that the thigh bone rests on the blanket quite soon. And that way this little bit of stretch that I feel in my inner thighs is just the right amount. Okay, so then I may have to do a little bit of adjustments just to get centered on the pillows and the blankets. And then we're letting ourselves relax. So now, by elevating my torso a little bit, what is going to happen is I'm going to create a little bit of a release right here in the front of my chest and the front of my arm. And again, I don't want it to be too spicy, just the right amount. So if you don't feel anything, that's okay too. We're all different, and some people have very sensitive experiences in yoga poses, and some people are quite mobile and have very little sensation. And it doesn't, it's just go to a point where either you stop because your bones are resting on the floor, or until you feel something, all right? But not too spicy. Just a little something. Because we want to relax into the shape. We're going to use the breath to kind of let go of tension and stress, just concentrating on breathing and on relaxing. And I usually start with the muscles around my scalp and right here on the sides of the head and all around the temples and the eyes. Because these muscles are ones that I often will carry tension in when I'm feeling a little stressed or out of sorts. And the stress can be, like emotional stress or mental stress, but it can also just be like, I ate too much sugar over the weekend and I'm not feeling completely settled. It was Mother's Day weekend, maybe you had dessert or something unusual. So all of those things create little changes in the body, just noticing the things that we've got going on, whatever they may be. Letting yourself breathe deep and relax in. We're going to stay for a couple more minutes here. after I've been kind of hanging out for a while, I'll suddenly realize, oh yeah, there's this little bit of extra, right? Like a little bit more tension on my right shoulder than my left. And a lot of times that sort of stuff flies underneath my radar screen because I'm so busy doing other things with my brain and with my awareness that I'm not paying attention to that. And so as those little things come up, we're going to stay for about 1 more minute. As those little things come up, you can make little subtle adjustments, like maybe that arm goes a little farther out, or you can even turn the head a little bit, right? So there's a little tiny bit more on the side that feels a little tighter or a little bit more intense. Or a little, stiff, or just doesn't have enough blood flow to it, whatever it might be. Take your nice big breath. And we're just kind of bring ourselves back to the center. So bring your knees back to the center. I'm going to take this blanket out. And then before I come off the pillow, I'm just going to give myself a little back and forth with my legs. And then I'm going to roll onto one side, and that is going to be the side where my twist is going to happen, okay? Because it felt like this is a good place to go. And then I slid that bolster out from underneath me, and then I'm going to bring my upper back down onto the floor. So now I'm in a twist, because my hip is going that way, and my shoulder's going that way, so the spine makes a twisting shape. Now, I prefer a little bit of support. Now, you can put the support in the inside, or you can put it on the bottom. I like it on the bottom. And then you can let the legs kind of drape over each other or stack on top of each other, whichever is better in your opinion. If you want to put a little head support in there, you could throw a blanket or something under your head. Sometimes I like to look the opposite way of my knees, but today it's feeling kind of nice to go in the direction. And it really is just a matter of how does the sensation feel with the shoulder and the neck in relationship to each other. Again, so I was concentrating on this kind of sense of opening up this front pocket and this of my shoulder right here in the front, and then this just takes it up one more notch. So my pectoralis muscles, the connective tissue that connects those into my arm bone and onto the rib cage, I can feel all of those places. And again, I want the sensation there, but I don't want it to be so intense that it's causing numbness in my fingertips, or it's causing any sort of burning sensation or pain. Those are always sensations. Burning, numbness, tingling, always a sense of something we want to pay attention to. And we might want to readjust and move around, or even come out of the pose altogether, depending on the intensity of it. We're going to stay here for about another minute and a half or so. Now for you, this might be more spicy along the outside edge of the hip than it is in the chest. So either of those two places, again, just pay attention to the quality of the sensation. If there's something there and it's interesting and you breathing with it and kind of relaxing into and around it, awesome. If it feels sharp or shooting, which usually your nervous system jerks you out of, but more intense or more concerning beyond that would be a burning sensation, the tingling, a numbness, or something that just inherently, if you get this kind of intuitive sense that, oh, it's too much, back off. Ooh. Just Stay for about 30 more seconds. Oh, pardon me. So we're going to take 2 more breaths. And with your exhale, just draw the navel in a little bit and kind of create some structure and support. Bring your top knee back. And then sort of let everything else follow. And we're going to pause for a moment and do a little movement. Now, after yin poses, it's nice to do some movement, whether it's just the legs, or in my case, I feel like, moving that arm feels really good also. And then just notice how things went. If there's anything that feels sore or tender or a little numb or anything like that now, also notice that, because that meant that it was, those sensations were there, but maybe under your radar. And so you're gonna bring just a little bit more presence to this, or even add some more props, okay? So we're gonna take ourselves over the other direction. So we're gonna roll onto the side. I already know I want that bolster there, so I'm just gonna pop that baby in there. And then as I adjust the bolster and get more room to bring my shoulder back down to the floor on this other side, okay? So I've got the twist. Now you could do twist a lot of different ways. This is just the way I've decided to get in here today. And for you, you know, there might be other ways that are more appropriate, so you can change it up. And then noticing, like for me, this side is spicier than the other side. And so I've got quite a strong stretch here. So what I could do to help with that is put a blanket here. Oh, it's stuck on my mat. Put a blanket here where my arm bone has a little bit of support. Yep, that's nice. So now it's not quite as intense. There's still a little sensation there, but I'm outside of the real spiciness. And if this lightens up, then I can just slip the blanket out and, you know, come back to that slightly more intense version. So come back to this kind of sense of letting yourself relax into the shape. Taking nice deep breaths, monitoring the sensation in your back, in your hip, in your arm, in your shoulder, wherever it might be that it feels interesting to you. All of the above. Just a tiny bit over 1 more minute here. Take a nice big breath. And we're going to float this top leg back up. Oh, and come on back. Oh. And give ourselves a moment just to stretch back out or add some movement or just see how that landed us. Oh. Oh. Now, we're going to do a spicy pose. It's called the swan. But before I get to the spicy version, I'm going to show you the less spicy version, which is done here on your back. And there's a couple of different ways to approach this. So the first way to approach it is I have one foot resting on the ground and I'm going to take the other leg and put it up on top. And for some of us, that's going to create enough spiciness in the hip and the kind of buttock region. That's going to be all that you need. Possibility number two is to use something, whether it's a block or a stack of books or whatever you've got, a box from Amazon, whatever you got, Andy. Put something underneath your foot and then you put the other leg up on top. Okay, so you have a little bit more height, but then so that things are a little bit closer and a little bit more spicy. Next option is to bring that in and hold on to your legs in some fashion. And then the last option is to hold this leg but let the other leg relax, which gets us a little closer to the swan because there's this kind of release at the front of the hip as well as this. Now this is tricky because you can accidentally torque your lower leg bone in relationship to your thigh and how much it's willing to turn, and then the knee pays the price. So you want to be very careful if you're doing this version and holding onto your shin. You might want to keep your foot a little more flexed to help protect your knee, and just be mindful that no pain winds up in the inner or outer corner of the knee. This is where your meniscus lives, which is the connective tissue that helps protect the bones, right, from the lower leg bones and the upper leg bone from each other, and then also the cruciate ligaments that go through the knee live in those areas, and we don't want to really wreck any of those things. Like, the knee joint needs stability, not mobility, right? I mean, it needs a regular amount of mobility, but we're not trying to torque it in weird sideways ways, because mostly it's a hinge joint. Right, so it's mostly trying to do that, and then it's those ligaments and meniscus are to stabilize us on uneven territory, uneven ground, not as much, and to make dance moves look really good, but we don't need that kind of mobility in our knee to make walking happen. So mostly we're trying to protect the knee. So you can do your swan that way, especially if you have a really sensitive hip, or you can roll to your side. Take a moment to kind of reorganize as needed to make room for yourself, and then you're going to bring one leg up and the other leg is going to go back. So one leg comes forward, one leg goes back. Now I prefer to have some support underneath my hip. I can do it like this. This is all right. You can also bend the knee like that a little bit, so it's a little bit more out to the side. That's okay too. What I like to do is put support underneath my pelvis here. So I'll use a throw pillow, works really great. You can also use a blanket or whatever you got. These are just really nicely shaped and they're about the right amount of fluffiness. Okay. So now this angle should serve your knee. And so if for you it's better if the foot is back in, tuck it back in. For me it's better up here, but it also makes the hip more intense, so I just have to be mindful of that. Okay. So then you see, like, does that leg want to go all the way straight? Should it stay out to the side a little bit? And once you're here, we're going to stay a while. Not a huge long while, because we don't have a very long time left for class here, but we're going to stay for a while, a few minutes, about 3. So this guy's a little on the spicier side. And so sometimes I do it longer, but it's a good amount of time. But with yin poses, the thing that we're doing is we're waiting out the nervous system a little bit. So what happens often when we get into these kind of deeper tissues is that a little signal is sent from the spinal cord to the muscle to contract the muscle a bit, to protect it, because we're creating stress in the body. And so that little contraction, we're kind of waiting for the nervous system to recognize, okay, well, nothing's tearing, so I can relax. So we're staying long enough to kind of wait that process out. And we're also staying long enough to encourage a hydrating mechanism in the tissue. We're encouraging the connective tissue to increase the amount of fibroblast cells that live there. And the fibroblast cells produce hyaluronic acid, which then pulls water into the tissue, and then the tissue is hydrated. And so it helps to build synovial fluid, and it helps to hydrate the layer of tissue, the layer of acid between the skin and the muscle, between the muscles where two muscles touch each other. And so it just creates a little bit more fluid movement in the body. That's the idea. Okay, now with all that said, again, we don't want to be aggressive, because aggressive, right, really intense, like, oh, I'm almost on the verge of not being able to stand this, means that there's a higher chance that I can damage my tissue as opposed to hydrate and repair my tissue. We want to lean into the hydrate and repair end of the spectrum and away from the damage end of the spectrum. We're about halfway through here. And so that is kind of the difficulty and the subtlety of Yin Yoga. It also, because that is the landscape that we're operating in, it also demands that we pay more attention. And so it does, as a practice, help us kind of develop those meditative attention to detail kinds of skills. Take nice deep breaths. This is that last minute, and this is the point for me where my nervous system is either going to let go or it's going to continue to protect me. And if I can feel that moment where it starts to let go, which is usually somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes for me, then cool, I'm going to stick around. If it feels instead like I'm being pulled up off of a bed of nails, get out of there. You've held it long enough. So we've got about 30 seconds left here. Take a really big breath. Now, I'm in this sitting up version, so I'm going to lean into my bent leg hip, and I'm going to bring my back leg around nice and slow. If you're on the reclining end of that, then just release the pose, and then we're going to take a few moments to rinse that side out and check in and see how we did, because this is where we'll know. So how does the overall feeling of this, like, does your knee feel tender? Does your hip feel sore? Is your back sore? Right? Is there numbness that you're like suddenly aware of you weren't aware of before? And the way that I kind of try to judge it is, what is the overall sensation of the side I just did? Is it nice? Is it pleasant? Or is there some not pleasant? And right now for me it's pretty pleasant. So I'm inclined to do the other side. This was my more challenging side. So if that side feels pretty good, I'm going to try the other side and see how things go. Again, I'm going in nice and easy, taking my time, addressing things as they come up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get into the basic shape. One leg is forward, one leg is working its way backwards. Feel that, okay? If automatically I'm like, ooh, my knee is telling me no, I don't want to keep going this way, I'm going to flip it upside down. If everything feels pretty good at this stage, then I can try putting the extra support in there and see how that goes. And if that went well, then I can try giving myself the extra, or just settling into the pose. Now I want just a tiny bit more support under this knee, because I know this knee is a little more sensitive than the other side. Okay. So bit more sensitivity. And then you're kind of feeling this out. And again, if you decide, well, I should probably get out of here. Listen, that's your, like, you know, instincts are funny. Gut feelings are funny. Sometimes they're, you know, like discerning whether they're coming from our ego or whether they're coming from some other aspect of our conscious mind or subconscious mind is tricky. What I will say is your ego is almost always trying to protect you from something. So even if it is that, if your body is in danger and you get a kind of instinctive feeling of, ooh, I should change this pose up because I feel like I'm hurting myself, go ahead and listen to that. It's a good idea. When in other instances, there might be a reason to question and sit with some of those notions. But if you're in a spicy yoga pose, it's probably okay to just go ahead and listen to those notions. Through our first minute, so we're just checking things out. Is it still feeling good? And again, if you're kind of getting any of those sensations that tell you, ooh, you should really get out of here, listen to those. If you're instead getting the opposite sensations, which are sensations that are like, ooh, that's nice, stick around a little bit. Let's see what happens as we hit the other half of this. Again, so any tingling or numbness you want to pay attention to, readjust your pose, throw in some props, those kinds of things. Up to and including getting out of the pose. Got just a little bit, like a little over 30 more seconds here. So this little lunchtime dose of yin, we're going to take a big breath. And again, I'm going to kind of lean into this bent leg hip, and bring my back leg around. And if you're laying on your back, you're good. Just stay there because that's a perfectly great place to be. And then give this whole thing a little rinse. So this little lunchtime dose of yin targeted two acupuncture meridians of the body. One that runs up the inner part of the thigh, and that is... there's a couple here, kidneys and liver live in this area. Liver was the area that we were after today. And then its companion is the gallbladder, and that runs up the outer hip. And so we were doing kind of outer hip and inner thigh in an effort to sort of balance those two. So those meridians are responsible for feelings of contentment in Chinese medicine. Feelings of contentment and peace and a sense of well-being with what's happening, or when they're out of balance, they can be anger or fear or more like grouchy, like petty, kind of prickly feelings. And so hopefully, if you've been feeling grouchy or prickly or petty, this kind of a little sequence helps give you a chance to sort of explore those emotions and let them kind of wash through you and start with a slightly more balanced place, or maybe they just bring you a sense of contentment. Now, we're done with our yin class, but you could, if you have time for your lunch break, you could stretch out and do some shavasana. You could take this right into a seated meditation and kind of see like what emotions came up for you or are coming up for you. Or of course, you could go make yourself a snack and have lunch. So thank you for joining me. Have a great rest of your day. Namaste, yogis.